A storm can start with a whisper. For Lily Moore, a 22-year-old waitress with calloused hands and a heart full of unanswered questions, it began with a single breathless sentence. For Dominic Crane, a billionaire draped in quiet menace and the chill of old money, it was the beginning of an unraveling. He had stepped into her quiet corner diner like a man carved from ice. But when her eyes locked on the antique bracelet gleaming on his date's wrist, her world tilted. It was her mother's. There was no doubt. The last thing her mother wore before she vanished 16 years ago. Lily leaned in and whispered it low enough to sound like a prayer. "That man took my mother's bracelet." Dominic Crane didn't flinch. He didn't speak. He just stared at her like he was seeing a ghost. And in that moment, Lily knew. He remembered something. Something he wasn't ready to confess. The hum of the diner filled the space between Lily's heartbeat and her thoughts as she turned away from the booth. The words she had whispered still burning on her tongue like an ember she could not spit out. "That man took my mother's bracelet." She had said it barely above a breath, a confession disguised as accusation, but it struck something. She could feel it. Not in what the man said, because he said nothing. Not in what he did, because he did not move. But in the silence he left behind. A silence so complete it rang louder than a shout. Her hands trembled as she reached for the coffee pot, the heat grounding her in something real. She focused on the simple mechanics of the job. Coffee, pour, smile, step, repeat. That routine had kept her stitched together for years, ever since her mother vanished when Lily was only 6. But tonight, the thread was unraveling. Her eyes flicked toward the booth. The billionaire had not taken his eyes off her. Dominic Crane. That was his name. She recognized it now from whispered conversations and newspaper headlines. A man made of cold steel and impossible money. He sat like a monument, perfectly still, his expression unreadable, carved from something harder than stone. The woman beside him chatted idly, oblivious, fingers flashing with rings and bracelets and gold. The bracelet. That was what started this. A glint of silver and sapphire caught in the harsh neon light. It was more than familiar. It was sacred. Her mother's bracelet. Her mother's final anchor to the world before she disappeared without a trace. Clara Moore had worn it every day of Lily's childhood. A gift, she once said, from someone who mattered, someone who changed everything. It had a clasp shaped like a rose and a small engraving on the inside. To Clara, always. It had been missing for 16 years, until tonight, until it walked into her life again, on the wrist of a stranger escorted by a man who stared like he had seen a ghost. Lily could feel his gaze now, heavy and invasive, not cold but calculating, not confused but remembering. She wanted to run back and demand answers. She wanted to scream. Instead, she poured another cup of coffee for a trucker at the counter and smiled as if the earth beneath her feet had not just cracked open. Her knees shook. She steadied herself against the stainless steel edge of the counter. She stole one last glance at the booth. Dominic Crane was still watching, still silent, still unmoving, as if he had been struck not by the accusation, but by the truth beneath it. Then he blinked, slowly, deliberately, and looked away. Lily turned her face down toward the coffee again. The tremble in her hands did not stop, but in her gut, something had started, something ancient, something dangerous, something like justice, or maybe vengeance, and it had begun with a whisper that landed like a stone in the middle of a still lake. Behind the chipped chrome counter where the smell of burnt coffee lingered like a permanent ghost, Emma wiped her hands on a dish towel and glanced at Lily with a deepening crease between her brows. The fluorescent lights above buzzed with a soft electric hum that had always made the diner feel sterile. But tonight the brightness felt like an interrogation lamp. Emma stepped closer, her voice lowered just enough to cut beneath the chatter of late-night regulars and the clatter of dishes in the back. "Lily, are you okay? You look like you saw a ghost." Lily's fingers tightened around the coffee pot as if it were the only thing anchoring her to the floor. Her throat was dry, her heart still slamming against her ribs like a warning bell she couldn't silence. She leaned in, her voice barely audible. That bracelet on the woman with him. It belonged to my mom. I'm sure of it. Emma blinked, then glanced toward the booth where the billionaire and his glamorous date had been sitting only minutes earlier. The booth was empty now, the imprint of presence lingering like perfume. Emma's brows lifted slowly. That's a serious thing to say, Lil. Are you sure? People have similar jewelry all the time. But Lily's face didn't waver. Her voice was a whisper sharpened into something steel-edged. I'm not wrong. It had a rose clasp and a blue stone and an engraving inside. I saw it. I know it. Emma hesitated, caught between friendship and realism, between belief and fear. She looked at Lily like someone trying to gently tug a person back from the edge of a tall building. Lily, that was 16 years ago. You were 6. Maybe your memory is mixing things up. It's been a hard week. Maybe this is your mind playing tricks. Maybe it's grief, stress, anything but this. But Lily's stare was steady, focused like she hadn't been in months. Grief doesn't make up details like that. My mom never took that bracelet off. She was wearing it the day she disappeared. It was hers. I'd bet my life on it. Emma looked away for a moment, exhaling slowly, chewing on her bottom lip. The silence stretched thin between them, held tight by the crackle of tension and the weight of something unspoken. Finally, she nodded once. Okay, say you're right. What does that mean? What are you going to do? Lily shook her head, her voice thick. I don't know, but I can't let it go. I can't unsee it. I have to find out where it came from. The air around them felt too hot now, too bright. The hum of the lights, the clinking of forks on ceramic, the scrape of a spoon in a sugar jar. All of it blurred into the background noise of a night that had stopped being ordinary the moment that bracelet gleamed in the light. Emma watched her for a long second, then reached out and gently touched her arm. I'm with you. But be careful. People with money like his don't play fair. Lily nodded, her mouth a firm line, her breath unsteady but her spine straight. She was not backing down. Not now. The clink of a spoon against porcelain snapped Lily's eyes back to the booth just in time to see the woman rise with the kind of effortless grace that came from a life spent wearing silk and never checking price tags. She adjusted her coat, gold and ivory rings catching the diner's overhead light, and her hand drifted to her wrist where the bracelet sat like a quiet scream. The silver gleamed, the sapphire winked, and Lily's stomach turned. It didn't belong there. It didn't belong to her. It had no business on the arm of someone who laughed so freely, who clearly had no idea what that bracelet once meant to someone who no longer had a voice. Dominic Crane stood up next, slow and measured, the way a man might rise after thinking longer than he wanted to admit. His espresso sat untouched in front of him, a faint curl of steam still dancing above it like a fading spirit. He didn't reach for it. He didn't look at the woman. His eyes scanned the diner with mechanical ease until they landed on Lily. And then they stopped. He said nothing. His expression didn't shift, not even a twitch, but in his stillness, there was something pointed. Not curiosity, not confusion, recognition, as if he had been waiting for someone to notice, as if he had expected this moment to arrive, eventually. His gaze held hers for exactly 3 heartbeats. Then he reached into the pocket of his tailored coat and pulled out a crisp $100 bill, setting it gently under the edge of the saucer like a man placing a rose on a grave. Without a glance toward the woman beside him, he turned and walked toward the exit. The woman followed, still chatting about something frivolous, the bracelet catching the light one last time as she pulled her gloves from her purse. Lily stood behind the counter, frozen. The air felt thick now, heavy with meaning she couldn't yet name. She expected something. A nod. A word. a threat. But Dominic Crane walked out into the cold night as if nothing had been said, as if no accusation had shattered the air just moments ago. But the way he had looked at her, the weight of that pause, told her everything. He knew. And worse, he remembered. Lily felt a strange mixture twist inside her. Disappointment that he had not said a word. Relief that he had not denied it. Fear that his silence was a strategy, not avoidance. She glanced at the table again. The untouched espresso, the $100 bill. A deliberate overpayment for something never consumed. She looked down at her own hands, pale and clenched around the edge of the counter, and realized she had not taken a breath in nearly 30 seconds. He had walked out, but something of him had stayed. A ghost of guilt, a threat without shape. The mystery had only deepened, and now she was in it, all the way in. The apartment was silent except for the soft ticking of a clock on the wall and the occasional creak of old pipes behind the plaster. Lily sat cross-legged on the worn rug beside her bed, a single desk lamp casting a warm circle of light that softened the sharp edges of the cramped space. She reached beneath her bed and pulled out a shoebox wrapped in faded newspaper, the corners soft from time and touch. It smelled faintly of lavender and dust, like memory preserved in still air. Her hands trembled as she peeled the lid back. Inside lay the remnants of another life, one she had only glimpses of through the fog of childhood and loss. A pressed daisy between notebook pages, a dried corsage, a hospital visitor pass with the name Clara Moore printed in blue ink. She sifted through the box slowly, reverently, until her fingers found the photo. It was curled at the edges, the color faded to a nostalgic tint, but the image was clear. Her mother stood in front of a flowering bush, smiling as though the camera belonged to someone she trusted deeply, and on her wrist was the bracelet. It wasn't just similar. It wasn't a memory warped by longing or imagination. It was the same. Lily traced the image with her fingertip, her eyes locking onto the rose-shaped clasp, the small gleam of blue at its center. She flipped the photograph over, half hoping there might be a date or a name, something that would anchor it to more than just emotion. Nothing. Just blank paper. She set it aside and dug deeper into the box. At the very bottom, tucked between folded stationery and brittle ticket stubs, she found a small scrap of torn silk tied around a charm. It was the bracelet's clasp. Detached, worn, broken. The engraving inside was barely visible in the low light, but she knew what it said. To Clara. Always. Her breath caught in her throat. That was the proof. The engraving was the fingerprint. No one would replicate that. No jeweler would copy it for a stranger. It had belonged to her mother and no one else. Lily pressed the metal into her palm, closing her fist around it as if to anchor herself to the truth. Her eyes filled with tears, the ache of absence swelling to the surface like a wound reopening. Her mother had vanished when she was 6. No note. No goodbye. Just gone. One day she kissed Lily on the cheek and said she'd be home before dinner. She never was. And all these years, the bracelet had been gone too. Until tonight. Until Dominic Crane. It wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't a mistake. That bracelet, now worn by a woman who probably thought it was nothing more than vintage charm, had lived another life. A life tied to Clara Moore. Lily wiped her cheeks with the back of her hand and placed the clasp back in the box. The questions had multiplied, but the certainty was unshakable. The past had come back, and it was wearing a name she intended to find. The memory came to Lily not in fragments but in full color, uninvited and complete, like an old reel of film spinning to life behind her closed eyes. It was spring, she remembered, because the lilac bush outside the window had just started to bloom, and Clara Moore stood in the kitchen with sunlight threading through her dark hair, humming something soft as she packed Lily's lunch into a metal box with a pink pony on the front. The house smelled like toast and strawberries. Lily, 6 years old, had her elbows on the table and a crayon in her hand, drawing uneven hearts across the paper placemat. Her mother laughed as she leaned down, planting a kiss on the top of Lily's head, the warmth of her lips lingering just long enough to be remembered forever. She wore a simple dress and flats, her favorite scarf tied around her neck, and on her wrist, the bracelet. Lily remembered it clearly because she had once tried it on, twisting it around her tiny wrist while Clara napped. It was too big, and the clasp was shaped like a rose, with a small blue stone in the middle that sparkled when the light hit it just right. To Clara, always. She had asked her mother once who gave it to her, and Clara had smiled in that secretive, soft way that meant she didn't want to explain too much. "Someone I trusted," she had said. "Someone who mattered." That morning, everything had felt ordinary, right up until the phone rang. It was an old landline, the kind that mounted on the wall with a cord that stretched into the hallway. Clara answered it with her back turned, her voice dropping low after the first hello. Lily remembered looking up, sensing something shift, the way animals feel a storm before the first cloud arrives. Her mother's voice had gone quiet, then tense. Then she had nodded once, said she would be there shortly, and hung up. She didn't come back to the table. She told Lily to play quietly until the sitter arrived. She was just running an errand, she said. She'd be back before dinner. She kissed Lily again, this time with a strange kind of finality that only made sense in retrospect. And then she walked out the door, the bracelet catching a shaft of sunlight one last time as her hand turned the knob. That was the last time Lily saw her mother. The sitter came. The sun set. And Clara never came home. Police were called. Questions were asked. But there was no note, no explanation, no trace. Only the bracelet vanished with her. Until now. Until the diner. Until Dominic Crane. The memory faded, but the weight it left behind did not. It settled heavy in Lily's chest as she blinked herself back into the present, the silence of her apartment pressing in like a vacuum. That phone call had taken her mother away. But maybe, just maybe, the bracelet could bring the truth back. The back office of the diner smelled like old printer ink and stale paper, the hum of the ancient desktop computer grinding to life as Lily sat down and closed the door behind her. The lights were fluorescent and flickering, casting uneven shadows against the cluttered corkboard covered in delivery schedules and faded holiday photos. Her heart pounded louder than the fan in the computer tower as she opened the browser and typed the name that had consumed her thoughts for the last 24 hours. Dominic Crane. She didn't know what she expected to find, but what she saw sent a chill across her spine. Article after article filled the screen, most of them vague and speculative. He was a tech mogul, founder of Crane Systems, a reclusive billionaire who had made his fortune building something no one outside the industry fully understood. Cloud infrastructure, defense software, quantum-level algorithms. The details were always murky, wrapped in corporate language and buried beneath layers of press silence. What stood out was what was missing. There were almost no interviews, no scandals, no family, no past. The man barely existed beyond his business empire and a handful of polished boardroom photos. But she kept digging, clicking through back pages of search results until she stumbled across something older, grainier. A red carpet photo from a benefit gala 15 years ago. The caption identified him, much younger, sharper-jawed but with the same glacial presence in his eyes. Standing beside him, smiling at the camera, was a woman in a dark dress with a pale scarf draped over her shoulder. The scarf, the hair, the bracelet. Clara, Lily's breath caught. Her chest tightened. It wasn't a resemblance. It was her mother, alive, present, beside him. Before she vanished, Lily leaned closer to the screen, her fingers trembling as she hovered the mouse over the image. She zoomed in. The bracelet sparkled on Clara's wrist, just visible beneath the edge of the sleeve. The same clasp, the same sapphire. There was no mistaking it. Her mother had known Dominic Crane, not as a stranger, not as a passing face. They had stood beside each other like people who shared something deep. The timeline matched. The photo was dated just 1 year before Clara disappeared. That changed everything. Her mother had been involved with him, somehow. They hadn't just crossed paths. There was a story behind that picture, one Lily had never been told. And Dominic had lied by omission. He had said nothing in the diner, only stared. But he had known. He had known exactly who Lily was. That look had not been confusion. It had been recognition. She closed the browser, her fingers gripping the edge of the desk to steady herself. The world tilted slightly. Fear flooded in, thick and cold. But under it was something sharper. Determination. She would not be another person who walked away from the truth. Clara had vanished into silence. Lily would not. She now had a name, a face, and a photograph no one had expected her to find. The past was not as buried as Dominic Crane wanted it to be. The diner was nearly empty, its tired booths bathed in the soft, flickering yellow glow of lights that had seen better years. The air smelled faintly of fryer oil and something sweet that had burned earlier in the oven. Outside, rain tapped lightly against the windows like impatient fingers, and inside, the silence was broken only by the occasional clink of cutlery being restocked for the morning shift. Lily sat at the far end of the counter, the same photograph pulled up on her phone, its glow reflecting off her tense expression. Emma emerged from the back with a towel slung over her shoulder, yawning, until she caught sight of the look on Lily's face. She stopped mid-step. "What is it now?" Lily didn't answer immediately. She turned the phone toward her, the image front and center. Dominic Crane, younger, darker hair. And standing beside him, smiling like the world hadn't yet taken her away, was Clara Moore, her mother who had been missing for 16 years. Emma leaned forward, squinting, her expression twisting from curiosity to disbelief. Lily's voice was low but urgent, the words coming fast. "This isn't just some rich guy. He knew her. My mom. That's her. Look at the bracelet. It's not a guess. I need to know how they knew each other." Emma straightened slowly, the towel forgotten in her hand. Her mouth opened, then closed again. A dozen thoughts passed behind her eyes. Lily. This was taken 15 years ago. Maybe it's a coincidence. Maybe it just looks like her. You were a little kid. Sometimes we remember what we want to remember. No, Lily cut her off. Her voice didn't rise, but it gained an edge, something sharp and unshakable. That's her. And that's him. And he looked at me like he already knew who I was. He didn't deny it. He didn't even blink. Emma stared at the screen again, then rubbed a hand over her mouth. She looked like someone staring at the start of a story she didn't want to finish. Even if it is her. Even if it's real. What are you hoping to find? That he's the key to what happened. That he hurt her. That someone did. People like him. They don't get touched, Lily. They don't answer questions. They bury them. That's exactly why I need to ask them, Lily said, voice steadier now. I've spent my whole life not knowing what happened to her. And now I have something. A face. A link. I'm not letting it go. Emma looked away, chewing her lip. The storm outside had picked up, wind brushing against the windows like a warning. After a long pause, she finally nodded once, slowly. Then just, "Be smart, please. Don't go digging if you're not ready to find something you can't bury again." Lily's fingers closed around her phone. Her mother had vanished into silence. But Lily had found the crack in the wall, and she had no intention of walking away. The diner was nearly empty again. Just like that night. The booths quiet under pools of flickering yellow light that made everything feel suspended in time. It was Tuesday, a slow night even by diner standards, and the world outside the windows had turned into a blur of streetlights and drizzle. Lily stood behind the counter drying the same cup for the 4th time when the bell over the door chimed. She looked up, heart stuttering as the man stepped through. Dominic Crane. Alone this time. No woman. No conversation. Just him and the sound of his shoes against the cracked tiles as he walked with practiced grace to the same corner booth. He sat like he belonged there, like he had always been part of the place, though he clearly didn't. The leather seat creaked beneath him, and then the silence thickened around him like fog. Lily stared for a beat too long. Her heart slammed like a drum in her ears. She could feel Emma watching from the back, frozen mid-clean. But this time, there were no whispered questions, no asking what she would do. She already knew. With her apron tied tight and her breath held steady, Lily grabbed a menu she didn't need and made her way over. She could hear the quiet hum of the lights, the slow clink of someone stacking dishes. But none of it touched her. The world shrank to the space between her and him. Dominic looked up before she could speak. His voice was low, not guarded, not hard, just quiet. It was hers, wasn't it? Lily blinked, the question catching her off guard not because it was unexpected but because of how gently he said it, like he already knew the answer and hated it. Her throat tightened. She nodded once, barely. Dominic's eyes were tired in a way that no amount of money or sleep could fix. He didn't look away from her. His voice stayed low, threaded with something heavy. Grief, or guilt, or maybe both. I thought I'd buried that piece of my life a long time ago. But you look just like her. Lily swallowed hard, fingers clenched tight against the menu. Her mind flooded with all the questions she wanted to ask, but none made it past her lips. Not yet. He leaned back slowly, his gaze drifting out the window toward the foggy street. She was wearing it the last time I saw her. That bracelet. I never expected to see it again. Lily said nothing, but inside, her heart cracked. Her mother's name wasn't spoken, but it was there between them, thick as smoke. Dominic's mask was still in place, but it was cracked now. She saw the man behind it, and in his silence, in the way his eyes didn't dare meet hers again, she knew. He hadn't forgotten Clara, not for a second. The bracelet had only confirmed what time had failed to erase. The past wasn't dead. It had been waiting, and now they were both trapped inside it. Dominic's eyes stayed fixed on the rain streaking down the diner window as if he were watching ghosts slide down the glass, each droplet dragging pieces of memory behind it. Lily stood across from him, still holding the menu, though neither of them noticed it anymore. The quiet stretched out between them, thick with the kind of tension that doesn't ask for permission. She opened her mouth to speak, but he beat her to it, his voice low and deliberate, like each word was being weighed before it crossed his lips. Richard Arledge. The name landed like a stone on the table between them. Dominic didn't look at her as he said it. His jaw was tight, his tone flat. But beneath that calm, something ugly simmered. He's the man who gave her the bracelet. The man who ruined both our lives. Lily blinked, stunned by the certainty in his voice. Her mind scrambled to make the name mean something, but it didn't. Yet, Dominic finally turned toward her. His expression wasn't cruel, but it was carved out of something cold, controlled. There was pain in it, but buried deep beneath bitterness and time. Richard was my partner, my friend, my mistake. We built the company together. We were kids, idealistic, stupid. Then the politics came. The money, the lies. He was always better at those. Now he wears a suit in Washington and shakes hands like they're made of gold. Senator Richard Arledge. Lily's stomach twisted. A senator. That was the weight behind the silence. That was the power behind the fear. She gripped the edge of the booth, steadying herself. Dominic went on, quieter now, as if the sound of Richard's name had drained him. Clara, your mother. She was close to him. Too close. She didn't know who he really was. Or maybe she did, and that's what made her dangerous. The bracelet was his idea. He had it made for her. A mark, a message. He always liked giving women things he could take back. Dominic's mouth curled slightly, not in amusement but disgust. Lily couldn't tell if he was talking about Clara or someone else. Maybe both. Maybe that was the point. She tried to speak, to ask the 1,000 questions clawing inside her, but her voice felt trapped behind the name now echoing in her skull. Richard Arledge. Senator, business partner, manipulator, and possibly something worse. Dominic leaned forward, his eyes finding hers, the fog in his voice clearing just long enough for the truth to cut through. If your mother disappeared, it wasn't random. It wasn't a mistake. She got too close to something he needed buried. And if the bracelet's found its way back to you, it means something he left behind is still alive, still dangerous. Lily's hands clenched into fists. She didn't know where this was going yet, but the pieces were starting to take shape. And the man at the center wasn't just powerful. He was protected, wrapped in politics and wealth and history, but not untouchable. Dominic leaned forward, his voice dropping low enough that it barely reached across the table, but the weight behind it filled the entire space. The sound of the rain outside deepened, the tap against the windows steady and cold, and for a moment, the diner felt too quiet, too still, like the walls were listening, like the light had turned sterile. His eyes locked onto Lily's, the glint of calculation replaced by something far more human. "If you keep going," he said, "he will come after you." Like he came after her. The words landed with a finality that turned Lily's blood cold. Not a threat. Not a warning made of ego or theatrics, but a truth born from experience. And in that moment, she saw it in his face, stripped bare in the flicker of fluorescent light. Fear. Real fear. The kind that doesn't come from losing money or reputation, but from knowing exactly how far someone will go when they have everything to lose. Dominic Crane had never looked weak. Not when he was silent. Not when he spoke her mother's name. Not even when guilt passed like a shadow across his expression. But now, with his voice taut and low and his gaze unblinking, he looked afraid. Not just for himself, for her. Lily's heart pounded against her ribs, but her hands didn't shake this time. She leaned in slightly, not in challenge, but in defiance of the pressure building around them. "Why are you telling me this now?" she asked. "You could have walked away. You could have denied everything." Dominic didn't answer right away. His stare dropped for the first time to the table, where the condensation from her water glass had left a small ring. His fingers hovered near it, but he didn't touch it. "Because I've watched someone disappear," he said finally. "I stood still while she vanished. I thought staying silent would protect what I had built, but it didn't. It just made sure I had no one left to protect." His voice cracked slightly on the last word, but he covered it quickly. "That's what Richard does. He erases problems. He doesn't argue. He doesn't threaten. He eliminates." Lily felt the air shift around them. Like the diner had shrunk. Like the distance between booths had collapsed and every square foot now pressed against her back. The same cozy space where she had poured coffee and laughed with Emma now felt like a cage, too small for the weight of the truth Dominic had just laid down. "So you're saying if I keep asking questions, if I keep pulling this thread?" He nodded. "He will pull back. Harder than you can imagine. You're not ready for what he hides. I wasn't. And Clara paid the price." Lily stared at him, her breath shallow. She wasn't ready. Not fully. But she wasn't turning back either. Dominic saw it in her eyes. The same steel he had once seen in someone else. And though he said nothing more, the look on his face changed. He was no longer trying to protect his silence. He was trying to protect her. The bank was tucked between a shuttered antique shop and a faded post office in a quiet upstate New York town, where the streets still smelled of damp leaves and old brick after the morning rain. Lily stood in the marble-floored lobby, Her hands clutched around the brittle envelope she had found tucked inside the shoebox of her mother's belongings. A receipt. Safety deposit box number 72. Signed in Clara Moore's slanted handwriting. The clerk had checked the record, asked no questions beyond an ID, and then disappeared behind the heavy steel door that led to the vault. Now Lily waited alone in a quiet too deep to feel like coincidence. Her nerves rattled under her coat, but she didn't move. This moment had waited 16 years. It could wait a minute longer. The vault door creaked open, and the attendant guided her into a narrow room with a table and a single chair. The box was metal, long and narrow, its surface cold to the touch. With trembling fingers, she turned the key and lifted the lid. The smell of old paper and lavender oil drifted up like breath from the past. Inside were letters, tied in thin ribbon, the pages yellowed but intact. She reached for the top one. Her mother's handwriting spilled across it in long loops. Not addressed to anyone. Just thoughts. Observations. Fear. Names. Mentions of Richard, of Dominic, of promises made and broken, of decisions she regretted but had no time to fix. Lily's fingers trembled as she read phrases like, "He said he would fix it and I don't know if I can trust him anymore, and the bracelet was meant to be a promise, but now it feels like a chain." She read each line with mounting dread, heart pounding as though her mother's voice was whispering directly into her ear from the other side of time. Then, nestled beneath the last bundle of notes, she found something wrapped in silk. Her breath caught. She peeled it open carefully, revealing a second bracelet, identical in shape and design to the one that had sparked all of this, but noticeably different in one crucial way. The clasp was unfinished. The space where the engraving would go was blank, smooth, waiting, as if it had been commissioned but never claimed. A promise never fulfilled. A gift that had no name. Lily's throat tightened. 2 bracelets, one engraved, one empty. Clara had kept this hidden. Why? For whom? The journal entries offered no clear answer, just confusion and fear. She had loved someone, or maybe been torn between 2 people, between loyalty and betrayal, between truth and silence. Lily stared at the unfinished bracelet, the cool metal catching the dim light of the vault. Who had this been meant for? Dominic? Richard? Someone else? Whoever it was, her mother had hidden it for a reason, not to forget, but to preserve. A secret never told, a message never delivered, and now it was in Lily's hands. Another piece of a puzzle that refused to stay buried. The journal pages were fragile. The ink faded in places, but the truth they carried hit Lily like a slap, each word unfolding a version of her mother she had never known. A woman shaped not only by tenderness, but by danger, secrets, and choices, with consequences that had stretched across decades. She sat on the narrow hotel bed she had rented for the night, the soft buzz of the heater barely covering the sound of her heartbeat in her ears as she read through the entries. Each dated and signed in Clara's elegant hand. They began innocently enough. Notes about travel, work, unease about a man named Richard who had offered her an opportunity. Then, gradually, they darkened. The handwriting grew rushed, the margins filled with names and phrases underlined multiple times. One line stopped Lily cold. He said he'd leave his wife, but I saw the way he looked at Dominic, like a pawn. Lily's mouth went dry. An affair. Her mother had been involved with Richard Arledge. And not just emotionally. It was physical, secretive, explosive. The entries described clandestine meetings in hotel rooms with curtained windows and cheap wine. Conversations whispered in parking garages and elevators. Always laced with promises Clara had clearly stopped believing. He wanted her silence, her loyalty, and above all, her discretion. But Clara had started asking questions. Questions Richard hadn't wanted answered. In one entry, Clara wrote, "He says he's protecting me. But from what? From who? I think he's watching me now. I think Dominic suspects. He's colder lately. Distant. They were never the same. Not really. I was something soft between their ambitions. Lily felt her stomach turn. Her mother hadn't been just a lost woman swept into a powerful man's orbit. She had been in the middle of something larger. A wedge. A liability. A secret Richard couldn't afford and Dominic didn't know how to carry. Another page revealed even more. Clara mentioned a project. A legal document. An agreement she refused to sign. She had something she was keeping. Something that made her dangerous. The journal wasn't full of answers. It was a maze. But it reframed everything. Clara had not just vanished. She had been a threat. A threat with knowledge. With leverage. With a voice that someone wanted silenced. Lily set the pages down, hands shaking, the hotel room spinning slowly around her. The light flickered above her. Outside, tires hissed over wet pavement and a siren wailed in the distance. The world felt farther away now. Clara had played a dangerous game between two men who wielded power like weapons. And in the end, she had paid the price for stepping into their war. She wasn't just someone's lover. She wasn't just someone's mother. She had been a storm in a system built to silence women like her. And now her daughter was holding the broken pieces of that storm, realizing that her mother's story hadn't ended. It had just been paused, and Lily was the one who had unknowingly pressed play. The rain came in, soft and steady, tapping against the window of Lily's apartment like a clock counting down something she couldn't name. The overhead light was off, the room lit only by the warm orange glow of the desk lamp, as Lily sat at the small kitchen table. The journal spread open before her, the pages curling slightly from age and touch. The knock came quiet but certain. She didn't ask who it was. She already knew. Dominic stood in the doorway, rain clinging to the shoulders of his coat, hair damp, eyes darker than she'd seen them. He didn't wait for an invitation. She stepped aside and let him in. He moved slowly, as if every step took more weight than he was used to carrying. She didn't offer him coffee. He didn't ask. She slid the journal across the table and watched his face as he read. No denial. No feigned confusion. Just a tightening of the jaw, a twitch in his fingers, a flicker in the eyes of someone who had lived with ghosts for far too long. When he finished the page she had marked, he didn't close the journal. He kept his hand on it like a lifeline. Lily crossed her arms, waiting. For answers. For something more than silence. Dominic exhaled slowly and looked at the window where the rain ran in thin rivulets down the glass. I loved her, he said at last, and the words dropped like stones into a well. But I was too afraid to protect her. I told myself I was protecting the company, the image, the future. But really, I was protecting myself. He turned toward her then, eyes hollowed by years of regret. Richard was dangerous. I thought I could keep Clara close enough to shield her without dragging her into it, but I underestimated him. I always did. Lily felt something shift inside her. The image of the cold billionaire who walked into the diner in a tailored suit had cracked, and through the fracture she saw a man who hadn't just lost someone. He had let her be taken, and he had lived with the knowledge every day since. Why didn't you do something? She asked, the sharpness in her voice dulled by something like understanding. I tried. Too late. He paused, swallowing. When she disappeared, I went to Richard. He denied everything. Said she ran. That she was unstable. Said, if I pursued it, he'd bury me along with her. And he could have. Then why are you here now? Lily asked. Why not just let it stay buried? Dominic looked at her, truly looked. Because I saw her in you. And I knew the past wasn't done with me. I failed her. I won't fail you too. For the first time, his voice didn't sound like a mask. It sounded like a man offering his guilt, not as an excuse, but as proof. proof that he had paid for his silence. And now, maybe, he was ready to speak. They weren't enemies anymore. They were survivors of the same silence. And something in that silence had just begun to break. The room had gone still. The rain now, a quiet rhythm in the background like a lullaby too slow to soothe. The journal lay between them on the kitchen table, its words already burned into Lily's mind, but Dominic hadn't moved for a long while. He sat with his elbows resting on his knees, fingers interlaced, gaze lowered like he was trying to find the right shape for a truth that didn't want to be spoken. Lily stood a few feet away, arms folded tight across her chest, waiting, dreading whatever came next. His voice, when it broke the silence, was hoarse and halting, a shadow of the man who had once built empires. "There's something else, something I didn't want to believe. But I owe you everything now. You deserve to know." Lily didn't move. She couldn't. The weight of those words pinned her in place. Dominic took a shaky breath. "The last time I saw Clara, before she vanished, she told me you were the only pure thing left in her life. At first, I thought she meant your heart, your innocence. But later I realized she was talking about blood, about who you were." Lily's chest tightened, a cold wash rising up from her spine. She didn't speak. Couldn't. Dominic finally looked up, and the expression in his eyes was not pity. It was anguish. "She never told me outright, but she said Richard had made promises he didn't keep, that he had left her to deal with the consequences. And then, she said she couldn't trust either of us anymore." Lily's throat closed. The room spun. She reached for the edge of the table to steady herself, but it didn't help. "You're saying," she began, barely able to shape the words. Dominic nodded slowly. "I think Richard is your father. I think that's why she tried to disappear. Because she knew what he was capable of, and she didn't want you tied to it." Lily stepped back, hand over her mouth, her eyes wide and unblinking. The man who may have had her mother silenced, the man who stood behind the mask of a senator, who had the power to erase people like pages from a book. That man might have been her father. The thought hit like a body blow. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't reconcile the idea that she was connected by blood to someone who saw people as liabilities, someone who had worn love like a weapon and left Clara alone when it mattered most. She turned away, blinking hard, staring out the rain-streaked window as if the answer could be written there instead. Dominic didn't follow her. He gave her space, knowing there was nothing he could say to make the truth softer. This wasn't just about Clara anymore. This was about identity, about legacy, about what Lily would choose to do now that she knew her blood might be tied to the man who had cost her everything, and whether she would let that blood define her or destroy him. The room smelled like dust and secrets, tucked deep within the east wing of Dominic's estate, behind a door disguised as part of a bookcase lined with volumes no one had touched in years. The hidden archive hadn't been opened in over a decade, maybe longer, and Dominic moved through it with the weight of memory pulling at every step. Lily followed close behind. The air cool and dry. The only sound the echo of their footsteps on the stone floor. Shelves lined the walls, stacked with boxes and drives and reels marked with dates and vague references. Dominic approached an old media cabinet, keying in a code that clicked open a drawer containing a series of labeled flash drives, each carefully organized by year and location. He reached for one, marked March 2009. Crane Tower. Loading the footage onto an encrypted tablet, he said nothing, but Lily could feel the change in him. Tension pulled at his shoulders. Regret settled in his face like dust. When the video began to play, the screen filled with grainy black and white surveillance footage. A timestamp ran along the bottom corner, the camera fixed on a rear service entrance to a private building downtown. Crane Systems' former headquarters. The building where Clara had worked as a consultant for a brief, undocumented time. The footage was silent, but the images were clear enough. A woman exited the building alone, stepping into the alley beneath the glow of a security lamp. Her head was down, one arm wrapped tightly around herself, the other brushing tears from her cheek. Clara. Even in the low-res grain, Lily knew her instantly. She walked quickly, her shoulders hunched, body language tense. Something had happened inside, something that broke her. Then the second figure appeared. A man. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a long coat. His walk was casual but with purpose, a hunter keeping distance from prey. He didn't call out, didn't run, just followed. Dominic paused the footage, zooming in, enhancing where he could. The face that emerged from the blur made Lily's blood run cold. It wasn't Richard. It was someone else. Similar in build, same eyes, same bone structure. Dominic's voice was a whisper when he said the name. Robert Arledge, Richard's brother, his fixer, his cleaner, the man who handled problems before they became headlines. The shock in Dominic's voice was real, even after all these years. I thought she left on her own. I thought she vanished. But he was there. That night, Lily couldn't look away. The conspiracy wasn't a lone monster. It had a body, a network, a system of silence built to protect the powerful and erase the inconvenient. Clara had run, but she had been followed. And now, they had proof. It wasn't everything. It wasn't the end. But it was a thread strong enough to pull. A truth with a face. And it meant that Richard hadn't just abandoned Clara. He had unleashed someone to finish the job. And that someone had never been far from reach. The ballroom glittered with opulence, all gold chandeliers and mirrored walls, the kind of place where power dressed in tuxedos and smiled behind champagne flutes. Waiters in white gloves moved like clockwork. The orchestra played soft strings near the marble stairwell. And beneath it all, the hum of carefully curated conversations filled the air. Lily stood just inside the entrance, wearing a simple black dress that didn't belong in a room like this. Her heart pounding like a war drum inside her chest. She scanned the crowd until she saw him, Richard Arledge, smiling effortlessly, his silver hair immaculate, his laugh polished and empty as he leaned in to shake hands with a CEO whose name she didn't care to learn. He looked untouchable, but Lily knew better. Her fingers tightened around the velvet box in her hand as she walked toward him. Each step heavy but deliberate. Eyes followed her, not recognizing her, but sensing disruption. As she approached, Richard turned, already wearing the smile of a man about to flatter whoever had dared interrupt him. It vanished the moment his gaze settled on her. Lily stopped just a few feet from him and opened the box. Inside, the bracelet gleamed under the chandelier light. The room felt like it inhaled. Conversations dipped, music softened, and time, for a breath, stood still. She held it out, her voice low but clear enough to carry. This belonged to Clara. She never gave it to you. You took it. Richard's expression didn't move at first, not even a flicker. But his eyes changed. That practiced warmth cooled, calculating something behind the glass. I'm sorry, miss. I think you're mistaken. That bracelet was on my mother's wrist the day she disappeared. She never came back. But you knew that, didn't you? The words rang sharp against the ballroom walls, not shouted, but with precision. Richard glanced around, seeing the attention. The cracks in the room's atmosphere were beginning to spread. A senator being challenged by a girl no one knew, yet everyone now watched. He stepped forward, dropping his voice. You need to be very careful about what you say next. That's a serious accusation. His tone was calm, too calm, the kind that came from being in control for too long. But Lily didn't flinch. She held his gaze. I have surveillance footage. I have journal entries. I know Robert followed her. I know you didn't act alone. And now everyone here knows you're afraid of the truth." That final sentence shifted the room. Murmurs rippled. Someone took a picture. Another whispered to a colleague. Power wasn't slipping. It was being pried from his hands. Richard straightened, jaw tight. But Lily saw it. The flicker, the tiny tremor behind his eyes. For the first time, she had him cornered. Not with force, but with truth. And in a room full of power, truth was the only weapon no one expected her to carry. Richard's face didn't twitch as he looked back at Lily, but the air around him had shifted, tighter now, coiled with tension beneath the polished veneer. He turned slightly, offering a gracious nod to the watching guests, the smile reassembling on his face like armor. "I understand your grief, miss. Truly. But accusations without proof are dangerous, especially in a room like this." He raised his hand slightly, signaling to a security aide who began to move in Lily's direction. "This is a misunderstanding. Nothing more. Clara Moore was a troubled woman. She left a trail of drama long before she disappeared. It's tragic, but you are simply mistaken." Lily didn't move. She didn't speak. Her grip tightened on the velvet box still open in her hand, the bracelet gleaming beneath the lights like an accusation that would not go quietly. The security aide stepped closer. The tension spiked, and then a new voice cut through the golden quiet of the ballroom. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." Dominic Crane stepped out from the shadows at the edge of the room, dressed in a dark suit with rain still clinging to his shoulders, holding a slim black flash drive between his fingers like a dagger disguised in plastic. His voice carried not by volume, but by authority, and suddenly all heads turned. Conversations ceased. The orchestra stumbled and stopped. Dominic walked forward with the calm of a man who had once built an empire and now held the pieces of its ruin in his hand. Richard's face paled a shade. Dominic reached the center of the room, standing between Lily and Richard like a wall of steel. He raised the flash drive. Surveillance footage from March 14th, 2009. Clara Moore exiting Crane Tower in tears. Robert Arledge trailing her less than a minute later. A man who had no reason to be there, who worked off the record, paid through a shell account registered to one of your private consulting firms. He turned slightly, making sure the press had a clear view of him. There are also scanned copies of Clara's journal, bank transfers, and an internal email from a now-defunct server at Arledge Capital, authorizing a non-disclosure agreement linked to Clara Moore's consulting contract. All time-stamped. All buried. Until now. The silence was no longer stunned. It was dangerous. A breath held too long. Cameras clicked. A journalist at the back raised a phone to film. A foundation chairwoman took a half-step back from Richard. Another turned away entirely. The room was turning. Slowly. Irrevocably. Richard's jaw clenched. But he didn't speak. He didn't have to. His silence said everything. For years, he had stood untouchable, protected by status and narrative. But now the story was breaking, and in its cracks, the truth was bleeding through. Lily looked at Dominic, and for the first time, he looked back not as a man hiding from the past, but as the one exposing it. The empire wasn't broken yet, but it was shaking, and the first piece had just fallen. The underground garage beneath the gala pulsed with low, humming lights and the distant echo of tires rolling over concrete. Lily moved quickly, her heels scraping the floor with uneven steps, the adrenaline from the confrontation above still burning through her veins. Richard had vanished the moment the cameras turned off, ducking through a side hallway flanked by aides. Dominic had followed the crowd to handle the press fallout, or so Lily thought. She just needed air, space, time to think. But as she turned the corner toward the garage entrance, her breath caught. A figure stepped out from behind a support column. Tall, broad, familiar in the worst way. Robert Arledge. His face was calm in that polished, corporate way, but his eyes were cold, focused. The knife in his hand reflected the overhead light like a flash of warning. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, his voice flat, quiet, like he wasn't angry but already resigned to what came next. "You weren't supposed to exist in this story, but now you've made yourself the ending." Lily backed away, heart pounding, her hands empty, her voice stuck behind her ribs. Her mind scrambled for escape, for options, but none came. The garage felt like a tomb, concrete walls pressing in, and the scent of oil and rain and danger filled her lungs. She saw it in his stance. He'd done this before. Quiet threats, quiet cleanups, quiet disappearances. Her mother's ghost screamed behind her eyes. Robert stepped forward. "You don't understand the weight of what you've exposed. The people you're trying to bring down. They built everything. The laws, the banks, the cameras upstairs won't save you down here." The knife glinted again, and then a voice rang out, sharp and fierce. "No, but I will." Dominic's voice cut through the air like steel through silk. Robert turned, but too late. Dominic moved fast, faster than a man with his life built on stillness should have. He slammed into Robert, the knife skidding across the garage floor. They crashed against the concrete wall, Robert grunting, Dominic's forearm pressing against his throat. "You touch her again, and I swear, no amount of politics will keep me from tearing down every corner of your family's legacy." Robert struggled, teeth bared, but Dominic's rage was quiet, controlled. Decades of guilt and silence had become fuel. Lily watched, stunned, heart racing, as the man who had once turned away from the truth now put himself directly in its path. Dominic shoved Robert back, the man stumbling, gasping. Security footsteps thundered from above. Sirens began to echo from street level. Robert ran, disappearing into the shadows like the coward he was. Dominic turned to Lily, breathing hard. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, but her knees felt weak. He stepped closer, steadied her, his hands surprisingly warm. "You saved me," she whispered. "No." He looked her in the eyes, fierce and unwavering. "I failed your mother. I won't fail you." In that moment, redemption wasn't something he asked for. It was something he earned. The night air outside the Arledge estate was sharp and alive, cut through by the whir of news drones overhead and the constant strobe of camera flashbulbs igniting the darkness like tiny explosions. Police cruisers lined the long, curved driveway, red and blue lights spinning across the manicured hedges and marble columns as if the entire house were bleeding truth at last. Lily stood just beyond the front gate, the cold biting through her coat, but she barely felt it. Her hands were clenched at her sides, her eyes locked on the front steps. And then, the doors opened. Richard Arledge emerged between two officers, face pale but composed, still wearing the tailored suit from the fundraiser, though now it looked more like a costume than a uniform. Behind him, Robert followed, bruised from his failed ambush in the garage, his lip split and jaw tight. The moment the cuffs clicked around his wrists, a shiver went through the crowd. Not fear, but release. A reckoning decades in the making had finally touched the untouchable. Cameras erupted. Reporters shouted questions. Neither brother answered until Richard, pausing at the bottom of the steps, turned toward the sea of microphones and flashing lights. His voice wasn't raised, but the quiet around him made every word carry. She was going to destroy everything. I had no choice. Just 6 words, but they were enough. A confession, not shouted, not wept, just spoken like fact. And in that sentence, Clara's fate was sealed. Not with mystery, with confirmation. She had threatened the machine, and the machine had responded the way it always did, by erasing the evidence. But Clara hadn't vanished. Not really. She had left echoes. A daughter, a journal, a bracelet that refused to stay buried. Now, Her name wasn't a question whispered in diner kitchens. It was a headline, a legacy, vindicated. Dominic stood beside Lily, his eyes fixed on the scene but distant, as if seeing it not just as it was, but as it might have been if he had spoken sooner. His silence was gone now, replaced with something like peace. Not forgiveness, but resolution. Lily's chest swelled with something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Relief. Not joy. Not triumph. But a release of the weight that had pressed against her every day since she was 6 years old. She stepped closer to the police tape as Richard was loaded into the back of a black car, cameras still flashing, the world now watching the fall of a man who had ruled from shadows. Clara Moore had spoken the truth in secret. And now, through her daughter, the world had finally heard her. The sun hung low over the horizon, casting soft gold across the rooftops and washing the town in a warmth that felt gentler than Lily remembered. The diner's rooftop was quiet at this hour. The clang of silverware and hum of conversation far below, distant and harmless. A breeze lifted the edge of the envelope in her hand, aged, yellowed slightly, sealed with a faint smudge of lavender. Her name was written on the front in ink that had faded, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Clara's. The letter had arrived without fanfare, delivered through a lawyer in upstate New York who had held it for 16 years under instruction. It had waited for her, just like the truth had. Now, with trembling fingers and the hush of the sunset behind her, Lily unfolded the paper and began to read. If you're reading this, it means the truth found you. I'm sorry I couldn't be there to give it to you myself. I was afraid, but not of dying, of being forgotten, of you growing up not knowing who you are or how much you were loved. The world I stepped into was never meant for hearts like mine, but yours is stronger. Live a life louder than their silence. Don't carry my burden. Burn it. Lily's breath hitched. The words were both a goodbye and a beginning. Clara hadn't written from fear alone. She had written with faith that one day her daughter would survive the silence and speak back to it. As she folded the letter, footsteps sounded softly on the metal stairs behind her. She turned to see Dominic, dressed simply, no longer the ghost of power he had once been. He said nothing as he approached, only held something in his hand, wrapped in a piece of silk, the unfinished bracelet. He set it gently on the table beside her and stepped back, giving her space. She picked it up, studying the smooth clasp. No engraving, no message. A second beginning, a chance to make it hers. Lily reached for the small engraving tool she had tucked in her bag, a gift from Emma, who now referred to her as the truth slayer of Table 7. And with the fading sun casting fire across the sky, she began to carve. Slowly, carefully, her name. Not Clara's daughter, not the senator's mistake, not a victim, just Lily. A name that had carried her through the weight of a lost mother, through lies and legacy and a silence designed to erase. But she had not been erased. She had found the truth, faced it, and now, sitting above the town where it all began, she claimed something new, a future of her own making, one where her story would not begin with what was taken, but with what she chose to become. If this story moved you or opened your eyes in any way, please take a moment to like this video and drop a comment below. We'd love to hear what part stayed with you the most. It helps us bring more powerful stories straight to you. Make sure to subscribe and tap the notification bell so you never miss the next twist, turn, or truth waiting to be told. And if someone in your life needs a reminder that even buried truths can rise, and that courage often starts with just one step, share this video with them. Thank you for being here.